You've been called intuitive, perceptive, emotionally intelligent. People have said it to your face like a compliment, and you've accepted it like one. Because what else do you do when someone praises something you didn't choose, didn't practice, and can't turn off? You read rooms the way other people read street signs, automatically, without effort, without even wanting to sometimes. You know when someone's angry before they raise their voice. You know when a laugh is real and when it's scaffolding. You know when a conversation is about to turn ugly while everyone else is still smiling, and you've already adjusted your posture, your tone, your entire internal frequency to accommodate a shift that hasn't visibly happened yet, and you've always assumed this was a gift, something you were born with, or maybe something you developed because you're a thoughtful person who pays attention. And both of those explanations feel comfortable enough that you've never pushed past them into the one that's actually true. What if the reason you're so good at reading people is that at some point in your life, reading people was the only thing standing between you and something you don't talk about anymore? Not a skill you cultivated, a sense you grew because your survival depended on it. The way a plant grows toward light, not because it loves the sun, but because the alternative is darkness. And the darkness was not a place it could afford to stay. There are 7 signs that separate emotional intelligence that was taught from emotional intelligence that was forged. And if you recognize more than 3 of them, then something in your history wrote a check that your nervous system has been cashing every day since. And nobody ever explained to you that there's a difference between wisdom and a wound that learned how to be useful. If this video is about to describe you with uncomfortable accuracy, like it now. Because the people who need this most are the ones who've spent their entire lives being praised for a survival mechanism they never asked to develop, and they deserve to understand what they're actually carrying. Sign 1. You detect tension in a room before anyone has said a word. You walk into a dinner party, a meeting, a family gathering, and within seconds, you have a full atmospheric reading that nobody asked for. 2 people at the table aren't making eye contact. Someone laughed half a beat too late. The host's posture changed when a specific person arrived. You clocked all of this before you sat down, and you're already running calculations about what it means and how to navigate it, and where to position yourself to avoid the blast radius if something detonates. Peter Salovey at Yale and John Mayer at the University of New Hampshire first formally defined emotional intelligence in 1990 as a set of abilities including the capacity to perceive, understand, and manage emotions in oneself and others. Their model was rigorous. It was academic. It was based on measurable cognitive abilities, and the version of emotional perception they described was genuine and valuable and learnable through education and deliberate practice. But there's another version, one that doesn't show up in their model because it wasn't learned through practice. It was installed under duress. The child who grew up in a household where the emotional weather changed without warning, where a parent's mood was the most important variable in any given hour, that child didn't develop emotional perception as a cognitive skill. They developed it as radar, not the polished, professional kind, the wartime kind, the kind that runs constantly, costs enormous energy, and never fully powers down even in safe rooms because the system that built it doesn't entirely believe safe rooms exist. If you can feel the tension in a room before evidence of it exists, you weren't taught that. You were trained by an environment that made not sensing it dangerous. Sign 2. You instinctively manage other people's emotions before you register your own. Someone near you is upset, maybe visibly, maybe not. But you felt the shift, and before your conscious mind has even finished identifying the emotion, your body has already started responding. Your voice drops half a register. You angle your body toward them. You offer the exact kind of attention they need, space or closeness, validation or distraction, calibrated in real time like a thermostat, adjusting to keep the room at a temperature where nothing explodes. You do this automatically. You've been doing it so long that it doesn't even feel like a behavior anymore. It feels like breathing. And while you're regulating their emotional state with surgical precision, your own emotional state is somewhere in a waiting room with a number that never gets called. Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist at Boston University and the author of The Body Keeps the Score, has written extensively about how trauma reorganizes the brain's priority systems. In a healthy developmental environment, a child learns to identify their own emotions first and then gradually develops the capacity to attune to others. In a traumatic environment, that order reverses. The child learns to attune to others first because the adult's emotions were the primary source of threat or safety, and their own emotions become secondary data. background noise, something to be dealt with later if there's time, and there's never time, because someone always needs managing. If your first instinct in any emotional situation is to scan outward rather than inward, that's not generosity. That's an operating system that was installed backwards and has been running backwards ever since. Sign 3. You know exactly what someone needs to hear, even when nobody taught you to listen like that. People confide in you. They always have. Strangers tell you things in waiting rooms that they haven't told their partners. Friends come to you, not because you give great advice, but because you do something rarer. You understand what they're actually saying, underneath what they're literally saying. The friend who says, "I'm just tired," and you hear, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." The colleague who says, "It's fine, it doesn't matter," and you hear, "It matters so much that I need you to pretend it doesn't, so I can hold it together right now." You hear the second sentence. You've always heard the second sentence. And you respond to that one, not the first one, which is why people feel so seen by you, and also why it's so exhausting. Because hearing the thing beneath the thing is not a passive act. It requires processing two simultaneous streams of communication and responding to the one that wasn't said. That's not emotional intelligence as a textbook defines it. That's pattern recognition developed under pressure. You learn to hear what wasn't being said because in your household, the unsaid things were the ones that mattered most. The words were unreliable, the tone was data, the pause was data, the specific way someone set a glass down on a counter was data. And you learn to read all of it because the spoken language in your house was less trustworthy than the unspoken one. Sign 4. You apologize for things that aren't your fault, instinctively and immediately. Something goes wrong in a group. A plan falls apart. A miscommunication happens. And before anyone has even begun assigning responsibility, you've already said sorry. Not because you caused it, because your nervous system has a hardwired assumption that any disruption in the emotional field is somehow connected to you, and the fastest way to restore stability is to absorb the blame before it lands on someone who might react badly to it. This one doesn't even look like emotional intelligence from the outside. It looks like low self-esteem or people-pleasing. But it's actually something more specific. It's a conflict prevention strategy that your body runs automatically, because at some point in your history, conflict was not a disagreement. It was an event. Something that escalated beyond proportion. Something that left marks, visible or otherwise. And your system learned that the cheapest way to prevent escalation was to make yourself the responsible party immediately, regardless of the facts, because someone who's already apologizing is very difficult to attack. Drop a comment and tell me, how many of these signs so far have you recognized in yourself? Because the next 3 go deeper than the first 4, and I want you paying attention to what happens in your body as you hear them, not just your mind. Sign 5. You can tell someone is lying or performing, not from what they say, but from what their face does for a quarter of a second before they say it. Seth Pollack, a psychologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, conducted research that should be cited in every conversation about emotional intelligence, but almost never is. In a study published in 2009, he found that children who had been exposed to volatile or abusive households could detect anger in facial expressions at significantly lower thresholds than children from stable homes. They needed less visual information, less exposure time, less intensity in the expression. They could read threat on a face that a control group would still classify as neutral. This wasn't superior emotional intelligence. This was a detection system that had been calibrated by necessity to a sensitivity that non-threatened children never needed to develop. The same way a person who grows up near a fault line learns to feel tremors that tourists don't register. If you catch micro-expressions that other people miss, if you know someone is about to lie before the lie arrives, if you can read an entire emotional biography in the way someone holds their jaw, you are not more perceptive than other people in some giftable, shareable, learnable way. Your perceptual threshold was lowered by an environment that made missing those signals costly. You see more, because at some point, seeing less was dangerous. Sign 6. You are exhausted in ways that rest doesn't fix. You sleep and you're still tired. You take weekends off, and Monday feels exactly as heavy as Friday. You've had vacations that felt like performing relaxation, rather than experiencing it. The tiredness isn't physical. It's not even mental in the way most people use that word. It's the specific bone-level fatigue of a system that has been monitoring, reading, adjusting, calibrating, and managing the emotional environment around it for years without a single day where it fully powered down. Martin Teicher at Harvard Medical School has published neuroimaging research showing that prolonged exposure to childhood adversity produces measurable structural changes in the brain, specifically, heightened amygdala reactivity. The threat detection center doesn't just respond more intensely, it responds more often, to more stimuli, at lower thresholds, and it does this permanently, or at least with a persistence that outlasts the original threatening environment by decades. Your brain is not tired because you're weak. Your brain is tired because it's running a security system designed for a war zone inside a peacetime body, and it doesn't know how to stand down because nobody ever told it the war ended. If your exhaustion feels architectural, like it's built into the walls of how you function, rather than something a nap can fix, this is why. You're not failing at rest. You're trying to rest a system that doesn't believe rest is safe. Sign 7. And this is the one that's going to cost you something to hear. You are genuinely, measurably, remarkably good at understanding other people. And you are catastrophically bad at understanding yourself. You know what everyone around you is feeling at any given moment. You can map the emotional landscape of a room with your eyes closed. You have helped friends through breakups, parents through crises, strangers through moments that required exactly the kind of perception you carry. And if someone sat you down right now and said, "Okay, but what are you feeling? Not what are you managing? Not what are you tracking? What are you actually feeling right now in your body?" You would pause, and the pause would last longer than it should. And the answer, when it comes, would probably be, "I don't know," or "fine," or something vague that doesn't land even as you say it. Because the entire apparatus that reads other people so brilliantly was built at the expense of the apparatus that reads you. Kristin Neff at the University of Texas at Austin has spent years measuring self-compassion in individuals who score high on empathy and other directed emotional care, and the pattern is consistent enough to be predictive. People who are extraordinarily attuned to others' pain are disproportionately likely to minimize, dismiss, or simply fail to register their own. Not because they don't have pain, because the system that was supposed to monitor their internal state was repurposed early in life for external threat detection, and it never got reassigned. Your emotional intelligence is real. The perception is real. The ability to walk into a room and feel its entire emotional weather in a single breath, that is genuinely extraordinary. But it was not a gift. It was a trade. You got the ability to read the world in exchange for the ability to read yourself. And you've been running on that trade so long that you forgot there was a cost. Every sign on this list, the room reading, the other managing, the hearing what's unsaid, the preemptive apologizing, the micro-expression detection, the exhaustion that sleep can't fix, the inability to access your own interior with the same clarity you access everyone else's, they all point to the same origin. Not emotional intelligence as a talent, emotional intelligence as an adaptation, a beautiful, costly, sophisticated adaptation that your nervous system built in real time to survive an environment that required you to become fluent in other people's emotions because your own were not the ones that determined whether the room was safe. You didn't learn this. You became this. And the difference between those two sentences is the distance between a compliment and an origin story that nobody ever asked you to tell. The next time someone calls you intuitive, you're allowed to accept it. It's true. But you're also allowed to know what it cost. And you're allowed, maybe for the first time, to turn that extraordinary perception inward, toward the one person in every room you've never fully read. You, the scan that runs constantly for everyone else, is allowed to run for you. Just once. Not to fix anything, not to manage anything, not to prevent anything from escalating, just to know. To finally, quietly, honestly know what's in there. It might be a lot. It's probably a lot. But you've been carrying it this long without looking at it. Imagine what happens when you do. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video connects to something specific inside this one, and if these signs landed, what comes next is going to explain a piece of this that I deliberately left unfinished today. I'll see you there.